My name is Raylan. I'm 34 years old, and I never thought I'd be sitting here today telling you this story. Right now, I'm in my cozy apartment watching my 8-year-old daughter Emma finish her homework at the kitchen table. 3 years ago, if someone told me I'd be this strong, this independent, I would have laughed through my tears. You see, there was a man who walked out on us during our darkest hour. But what he found when he came back wasn't the broken woman he left behind. Before I dive into this journey, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. If stories of healing and strength resonate with you, please hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to share might just change how you see second chances forever. 7 years ago, I was a completely different person. I met Jake at our local community college, where I was studying nursing and working part-time at Murphy's Diner downtown. He was this charming guy in my statistics class, always cracking jokes and making everyone laugh. Jake was studying business management and had this infectious confidence about his future. He'd lean back in his chair and talk about all the companies he was going to start, all the success he'd achieve. Our first date was at this little coffee shop near campus. We ended up talking for 4 hours straight about everything and nothing. He told me about his dreams of building a business empire, and I shared my passion for helping people heal. Those late-night study sessions turned into something magical. We'd spread our textbooks across his tiny dorm room floor, but half the time we'd end up talking about our future instead of calculus. Jake had this way of making me feel like I was part of something bigger. He'd grab my hands across the table at the diner during my break and say, "We're going to have everything, Ray. A house with a white picket fence, kids running around the backyard, the whole American dream." The way his eyes lit up when he talked about our future made me believe it was all possible. After 6 months, we decided to move in together. It was this tiny studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's flower shop, but to us it felt like a palace. The rent was $350 a month, which was all we could afford on my waitressing tips and Jake's part-time job at the campus bookstore. We painted the walls this awful shade of yellow because the paint was on clearance, but we told ourselves it was sunshine-colored. I picked up double shifts at the diner to help Jake through his final year of college. My own nursing classes got pushed to part-time, but I convinced myself it was temporary. Jake would graduate, start his business, and then I'd finish my degree. We had it all planned out on a napkin one Tuesday morning over scrambled eggs and coffee that was too strong. That same Tuesday morning, Jake proposed to me right there in our little kitchen. No ring, no fancy speech, just him getting down on one knee next to our secondhand refrigerator and asking if I wanted to build a life with him. I said yes before he even finished the question. But even in those early days, there were warning signs I chose to ignore. Jake's first business venture was selling energy drinks to college students. He used our grocery money to buy inventory that never sold, leaving us eating ramen noodles for 2 weeks straight. When I gently suggested maybe we should have talked about it first, he accused me of not believing in his vision. Our first real fight happened on a cold February night. Jake had just found out his second business idea, a campus laundry service, had failed spectacularly. We'd lost our small savings account and were behind on rent. I came home from a 12-hour shift at the diner, exhausted and worried, only to find him drinking beer and watching TV like nothing had happened. "How can you just sit there?" I asked, my voice shaking from exhaustion and frustration. "We have $23 in our checking account, Jake. $23. He stood up so fast the beer bottle fell over. "You think this is easy for me? You think I'm not trying hard enough? Maybe if you supported me instead of constantly questioning everything I do, things would be different." The words stung because I'd been working myself to exhaustion supporting him. But he apologized the next morning with coffee from the fancy shop I loved, but we couldn't afford. He promised things would get better, that his next idea would be the one. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. At 26 years old, I discovered I was pregnant during what should have been one of the happiest times in our lives. Jake had just graduated, and I was finally going to return to school full-time in the fall. Instead, I found myself staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test in the bathroom of Murphy's Diner during my 15-minute break. I drove home in a daze, practicing how I'd tell Jake the news. When I walked into our apartment, he was on the phone with another potential investor for his latest scheme, something about importing novelty t-shirts. I waited until he hung up, then sat him down on our worn-out couch. "Jake, we need to talk about something important." I took his hands in mine, feeling how cold mine had gotten. "I'm pregnant." The color drained from his face. For a full 30 seconds, he just stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Then he tried to smile, but it looked forced and uncomfortable. Wow, he said, running his hands through his hair. I mean, that's great, right? It's just the timing is really complicated with everything I've got going on. The reality hit us both like a freight train. A baby meant doctor visits, hospital bills, diapers, formula, and eventually childcare costs. My job at the diner provided minimal health insurance, and Jake's latest business venture existed only on paper and wishful thinking. My pregnancy was rough from the beginning. Morning sickness lasted all day for the first 4 months, making it impossible to handle the smell of the diner's grease and coffee. I had to cut my hours, which meant less money exactly when we needed more. Jake tried to be supportive, but I could see the stress wearing on him. Maybe this baby is a sign, he said one evening, rubbing my back as I dealt with another wave of nausea. Maybe it's telling us to get serious about our future. But getting serious seemed to mean Jake throwing himself into increasingly desperate business schemes. There was the failed attempt to start a food truck, which cost us our security deposit when he couldn't make the loan payments. Then came the multi-level marketing phase, where our tiny apartment filled with protein shakes and vitamin supplements that never sold. As my belly grew, so did the tension between us. Jake started staying out later, claiming he was networking and meeting with potential business partners. I'd lie awake at night, 8 months pregnant and exhausted, waiting to hear his key in the lock. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until after midnight, full of stories about meetings that sounded increasingly vague. The fights became more frequent and more intense. Money was always at the center of them, but underneath was something deeper. Jake seemed to resent the pregnancy the way it had disrupted his timeline and dreams. He never said it directly, but I could feel it in his silences and the way he'd change the subject whenever I tried to talk about baby preparations. I feel like I'm drowning, Ray, he told me during one of our late-night arguments. Between the business pressure and now this baby coming, I can't breathe. I never expected life to be this hard at 24. I wanted to remind him that I was only 26 and felt just as overwhelmed, but I was too tired to fight anymore. Instead, I focused on preparing for the baby as best I could with our limited resources. I bought secondhand baby clothes from garage sales and accepted hand-me-downs from the other waitresses at work who had kids. At 37 weeks pregnant, I ended up in the emergency room with dangerously high blood pressure. The doctor, a kind woman about my mother's age, looked at my chart with concern. "Mrs. Williams, your stress levels are through the roof. This isn't just about the pregnancy anymore. You need to eliminate stress from your life, or we're looking at serious complications for both you and the baby." Jake's reaction when he got to the hospital wasn't what I expected. Instead of relief that we were okay, he immediately started complaining about the cost of the ambulance ride and the emergency room visit. "Do you know how much this is going to cost us? We don't have insurance that covers this kind of thing. What am I supposed to tell the landlord when we can't make rent again?" That night, Jake didn't come home at all. I called his phone every hour until the battery died, terrified something had happened to him. When he finally walked through the door at dawn, he smelled like alcohol and cigarettes, neither of which he usually indulged in. "I needed some air," was all he said when I asked where he'd been. I needed to think. Emma decided to make her entrance into the world on a Tuesday morning at 38 weeks, just as I was getting ready for what I thought would be another routine doctor's appointment. Instead, my water broke all over our bathroom floor, and the contractions started coming fast and hard. I called Jake's phone 15 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. "Jake, the baby's coming. I'm going to the hospital. Please, please call me back." Mrs. Henderson from next door heard me crying in the hallway and helped me get to her car. This 70-year-old woman I barely knew drove me to the hospital while I breathed through contractions and tried not to panic about facing this alone. Emma was born after 6 hours of labor, healthy and beautiful, with a full head of dark hair, just like her father's. The moment they placed her on my chest, everything else in the world disappeared. This tiny person was mine to protect and love no matter what else was falling apart around us. Jake finally showed up 3 hours later carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and a list of excuses that made no sense. He'd been in a business meeting that ran late, then his phone had died, then he'd gotten lost trying to find the hospital. The smell of alcohol on his breath told a different story, but I was too exhausted and emotional to confront him. "She's beautiful, Ray," he said, holding Emma awkwardly like she might break. "She looks just like you." For a moment, looking at him holding our daughter, I let myself believe everything would be okay. Maybe becoming a father would change him, make him more responsible, more present. Maybe this was the fresh start we both needed. The first month after Emma's birth was the hardest time of my life. Recovery from childbirth while caring for a newborn is challenging under the best circumstances, but our circumstances were far from ideal. Jake tried to help, but his idea of helping was holding the baby for 20 minutes while I showered, then complaining that she wouldn't stop crying. I was getting maybe 3 hours of sleep a night, broken into 30-minute chunks. Breastfeeding was painful and exhausting, but we couldn't afford formula. Our grocery budget was stretched so thin that I was eating peanut butter sandwiches twice a day to make sure there was enough real food for Jake. Meanwhile, Jake's job interviews and business meetings became more frequent and more mysterious. He'd leave in the morning wearing his one good shirt and tie, promising big news by evening, then return empty-handed with stories about how he'd almost closed a deal or how the investor needed more time to think. "These things take time, Ray," he'd say when I asked about the practical details. "You can't rush success. Once this deal goes through, we'll be set. No more money worries, no more stress." But the stress was killing us financially and emotionally. Our electricity got shut off twice that month because we couldn't pay the bill. I had to choose between buying diapers and paying for gas to get to Emma's pediatrician appointments. The eviction notice appeared on our door when Emma was exactly 6 weeks old. That's when I found the text messages on Jake's phone. I wasn't snooping intentionally. His phone buzzed on the counter while he was in the shower, and I glanced over expecting it might be about a job opportunity. Instead, I saw a string of messages from someone named Amanda. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Jake, you make me feel alive again. I know this is complicated with the baby situation, but we deserve to be happy. She doesn't understand you like I do." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I scrolled up through weeks of messages, watching my life unravel in real time. Jake had been having an affair with his so-called business partner for 2 months, including the night Emma was born, when he disappeared for hours. When Jake got out of the shower, I was sitting on our bed holding his phone and crying silently. Emma was sleeping in her crib, unaware that her family was dissolving around her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the tears streaming down my face. The conversation that followed was the most painful 20 minutes of my life. Jake didn't deny the affair, he didn't apologize, and he didn't try to fight for our relationship. Instead, he turned it around on me. "You want to know the truth, Ray? I feel trapped. I feel like my entire life got derailed the minute you got pregnant. I'm 24 years old. I should be building my career, taking risks, living my life. Instead, I'm stuck in this tiny apartment with a crying baby and a girlfriend who's always tired and stressed." "That crying baby is your daughter," I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. "And that tired, stressed girlfriend has been working herself to death trying to keep us afloat while you chase fantasy business deals and cheat with Amanda. Amanda understands my vision. She believes in me. She doesn't make me feel guilty for wanting more out of life." The cruelest words came next. "I never wanted this life, Ray. You and that baby, you're suffocating me. I can't breathe, I can't think, I can't be who I'm supposed to be." He gave me an ultimatum that night. I could choose to work on saving our relationship, which apparently meant accepting that Amanda would remain in the picture, while he figured things out, or I could insist on being a single mom and lose him forever. I looked at this man I'd loved for 3 years, the father of my 6-week-old daughter, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. The Jake I'd fallen in love with had either never existed or had disappeared completely under the pressure of real adult responsibilities. "I choose Emma," I said quietly. "I choose being her mom, whatever that means." The next morning, I woke up to find half of our belongings gone and a note on the kitchen counter. "I need space to think about what I really want. This isn't working for me anymore." He'd taken his clothes, his computer, our television, and the $63 in cash we'd been saving for Emma's next box of diapers. He left behind a closet full of baby clothes, a crib we still owed money on, and 2 people who had depended on him completely. Finding myself alone with a 2-month-old baby and an eviction notice was like falling into a bottomless pit. The math was simple and terrifying. I owed $800 in back rent, had $17 in my checking account, and no way to earn money while caring for Emma full-time. The day after Jake left, I swallowed what remained of my pride and called my parents in Columbus, Ohio. We hadn't spoken much since I'd moved in with Jake 3 years earlier. They'd never approved of him, which had driven a wedge between us that kept growing wider. "Raylan," my mother's voice sounded surprised and not particularly pleased. "It's been months since we've heard from you." "Mom, I need help. Jake left us and I'm about to be evicted. I have a baby now, Emma. She's 2 months old." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When my mother finally spoke, her words cut deeper than any knife. "We warned you about that boy, Raylan. We told you he wasn't reliable, but you wouldn't listen. You chose him over your family, and now you want us to clean up the mess." They offered to let me come home, but their conditions made it clear I'd be a burden rather than a welcome daughter. I could have the basement room, but I'd need to pay rent as soon as I found work. I could stay until I got back on my feet, but there would be rules about curfew and visitors. Most painfully, they made it clear they saw Emma as the reason my life had gone off track, not as their granddaughter. Instead of going home with my tail between my legs, I made one of the scariest decisions of my life. I applied for emergency assistance and temporary housing through the county social services office. 3 days later, Emma and I moved into the Riverside Women's Shelter. The shelter was a converted school building that housed 42 women and 67 children in various states of crisis. Our room was 8 feet by 10 feet, containing 2 twin beds, a small dresser, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot of a gas station. The bathroom was shared by 8 people, and there was a strict schedule for everything from meals to shower time. Emma got sick during our second week at the shelter. The constant noise and stress, the poor ventilation, and being around so many other children exposed her to every germ imaginable. She developed a fever and a cough that landed us in the emergency room, adding another $400 bill to my growing mountain of debt. Every day was a struggle just to survive. I'd wake up at 5:30 in the morning to feed Emma before the rush for the single microwave in the common kitchen. Breakfast was provided by the shelter, usually watery oatmeal or stale toast, but I was grateful for anything free. Then I'd spend hours on the phone trying to find childcare so I could look for work, only to discover that the waiting lists for subsidized daycare were months long. Job interviews became a logistical nightmare. I'd have to find someone at the shelter willing to watch Emma for an hour, which meant owing favors I couldn't repay. I'd show up to interviews wearing my one professional outfit, a black skirt and white blouse that I hand-washed in the bathroom sink every other night, trying to project confidence while my mind raced with worry about my daughter. The bureaucracy was overwhelming and dehumanizing. I spent entire days in government offices carrying Emma in her car seat, waiting for hours to speak with caseworkers who had 15 minutes to decide our fate. There were forms for food stamps, forms for emergency assistance forms, for temporary childcare, each requiring documentation I didn't have or couldn't afford to obtain. Jake's occasional text messages during this time were like salt in an open wound. "How's Emma doing, Tug?" he'd ask, as if he was a distant relative checking in rather than her father. When I replied with updates about her development or mentioned that we were staying at a shelter, he'd either ignore the message or respond with something vague about his own situation being complicated right now. The legal aid lawyer I finally connected with explained that pursuing child support would be a long, expensive process with no guarantee of results. Jake had no official income, no assets to garnate, and no fixed address that she could find. Even if we won a judgment, collecting money from someone determined to avoid responsibility was nearly impossible. There were nights during those first few months when I seriously considered calling Jake and begging him to come back. Not because I wanted him, but because I was so exhausted and scared that having any help seemed better than facing everything alone. Emma would be crying at 2 a.m, and I'd be sitting on the floor of our tiny shelter room, overwhelmed by the magnitude of raising a child with no support system and no resources. But it was actually another shelter resident who talked sense into me during my darkest moment. Maria Rodriguez was a 40-year-old woman from El Salvador who'd left an abusive husband with 3 children under age 7. She found me crying in the laundry room one night after a particularly difficult day. "Mija," she said in her heavily accented English, sitting down next to me while our clothes tumbled in the ancient washing machines. "You think going back to that man would make things easier?" I nodded, too tired to explain all the complicated feelings. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. A man who leaves you when you need him most, he will leave you again. But next time, you might not be strong enough to rebuild. Right now, you're building something he cannot take away from you. Your strength, your independence, your ability to take care of your baby. Don't give that power back to someone who already proved he doesn't deserve it." Maria was right, even though it took me months to fully understand what she meant. The turning point came when Emma was 4 months old, and I finally landed a job at MedCorp, a medical billing company downtown. It wasn't glamorous work, data entry and insurance claims processing, but it offered something I desperately needed: stability. The job paid $12 an hour, which was barely enough to cover basic expenses, but it came with health insurance after 90 days and opportunities for advancement. My supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who made it clear she'd hired me despite having a young child, not because of it. "I'm giving you a chance because you need it," she told me on my first day. "Don't make me regret it. Show up on time, do your work, and leave your personal problems at home." Finding childcare was the next hurdle. The subsidized daycare program had a 6-month waiting list, so I had to find a private solution I could barely afford. Carmen's family daycare was run out of a woman's home 20 minutes from my work. It wasn't perfect, but Carmen was kind to Emma and charged on a sliding scale based on income. After 3 months at the shelter, Emma and I moved into our first real apartment. It was a 1-bedroom in a neighborhood that definitely wasn't the safest, but it was ours. The rent was $450 a month, leaving me about $300 for everything else: food, utilities, gas, diapers, and all of Emma's needs. Those early months of independence were terrifying and liberating at the same time. I'd come home from work exhausted, pick up Emma from daycare, and spend the evening playing with her on the living room floor of our sparsely furnished apartment. We couldn't afford cable or internet, so our entertainment was books from the library and whatever toys I could buy secondhand. But there were beautiful moments that made all the struggle worthwhile. Emma's first laugh happened on a Saturday morning when she was 6 months old. I was making funny faces at her while she lay on a blanket in a patch of sunlight from our window, and suddenly she burst into this infectious giggle that made me cry with joy. No matter how hard things got, she was this constant source of light in my life. I started taking evening classes in medical coding at the community college, using the computer lab, after hours since I couldn't afford my own laptop. The classes were 3 nights a week, which meant finding a neighbor willing to watch Emma for a few hours, in exchange for babysitting her kids on weekends. It was exhausting, but I knew education was the only way to build a better future for us. My friendship with Sarah Martinez developed naturally. She lived in the apartment above mine with her 5-year-old son Tyler, and she was also a single mom trying to make it work. Sarah worked as a night shift nurse at the hospital, so we started trading childcare duties. I'd watch Tyler in the evenings when she worked, and she'd take Emma during the day when I had classes or needed to run errands. "We've got to stick together," Sarah told me one evening as we watched our kids play in the courtyard behind our building. "Nobody else understands what this is like." The local community center became another lifeline. They offered free activities for kids, a food pantry once a month, and support groups for single mothers. Sister Margaret, who ran the program, became a mentor and friend. She never judged anyone's situation or offered empty platitudes, just practical help and genuine compassion. "Healing takes time," she told me during one of our conversations. "Be patient with yourself and don't let anyone else define your timeline." I started therapy through a sliding scale program at the community health center. Talking to someone neutral about everything I'd experienced helped me process the trauma and start building genuine self-worth. Dr. Kim never told me what to do, but she helped me recognize patterns and make connections I couldn't see on my own. "You're not the same person who entered this relationship 7 years ago," she observed during one session. "You've survived things that would break a lot of people. That strength didn't come from nowhere, it was always part of you." By Emma's 2nd birthday, our life had found a rhythm. I'd been promoted twice at MedCorps and was now making $16 an hour as a senior billing specialist. We'd moved to a nicer 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, and Emma was thriving in a wonderful daycare program. The birthday party was small but perfect. Sarah and Tyler came over along with Carmen from daycare and a few neighbors who'd become friends. We decorated with balloons from the dollar store, and I made a cake from a box mix, but Emma's face when she saw everything set up for her was worth more than any expensive celebration could have been. That night, after everyone had gone home and Emma was asleep in her own bedroom, for the first time, I realized something significant had happened. I hadn't thought about Jake in weeks, maybe even months. The constant ache of missing him and wondering what he was doing had simply disappeared without me noticing. For the first time since Emma's birth, I felt genuinely happy, rather than just surviving day to day. 3 years after Jake walked out on us, my life looked nothing like the chaos he'd left behind. I'd been promoted again at MedCorps to billing supervisor, managing a team of 8 people and making $22 an hour. Emma was starting 2nd grade at a good elementary school, confident and bright with friends and activities that filled her world with joy. We'd moved into a comfortable two-bedroom apartment in Riverside Heights, a middle-class neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a playground Emma could walk to safely. I'd finally saved enough money to buy a reliable used car, a 2018 Honda Civic that didn't leave me wondering if we'd make it to our destination every time we drove somewhere. My social life had expanded beyond survival mode. I'd been casually dating Tom, a physical therapist I'd met through the community center for about 4 months. Nothing serious, but he was kind to Emma and made me laugh, which felt revolutionary after years of being alone. I had a solid group of friends, mostly other single moms, who understood the challenges and celebrated the victories. Emma's relationship with her father remained non-existent by his choice. She'd stopped asking about him around her 3rd birthday, and I'd made peace with protecting her from the disappointment of having a parent who simply wasn't present. She had a rich, full life surrounded by people who chose to be there for her. Physically and emotionally, I was the strongest I'd ever been. I'd started working out at the community center gym, not to impress anyone, but because I'd discovered how much better I felt when I took care of my body. Therapy had helped me process the trauma and build genuine confidence, rather than the performance of confidence I'd worn for years. That Saturday morning in November started like any other weekend. Emma was sleeping over at her friend Madison's house, which gave me a rare morning to myself. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my pajamas, drinking coffee that was still hot, and reading a book I'd bought brand new rather than borrowed from the library. The knock at my door was unexpected. I wasn't expecting any packages or visitors, and it was only 9:30 in the morning. When I looked through the peephole, my entire world shifted. Jake was standing in my hallway. 7 years had changed him dramatically. He looked older, thinner, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His clothes, once carefully chosen to project success and ambition, now hung loosely on his frame. Most shocking was his expression. The arrogant confidence had been replaced by something that looked like desperation. I opened the door slowly, my brain struggling to process that this was really happening. "Hello, Ray," he said quietly. His voice sounded rough or tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Jake." I couldn't think of anything else to say. After 3 years of building a life without him, seeing him standing there felt surreal, like encountering a character from a book I'd read long ago. "I know this is unexpected. I know I have no right to just show up here. But I had to see you. I had to tell you that I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you and Emma." The words I'd once desperately wanted to hear now felt strange and disconnected from my reality. I stood there looking at him, waiting to feel something: anger or hurt, or even relief. But mostly I just felt curious about what had brought him to my door after all this time. "Would you like to come in?" I heard myself ask, surprising us both. My apartment was warm and inviting, filled with pictures of Emma and evidence of the life we'd built together. Jake's eyes took in everything: the comfortable furniture I'd saved for months to buy, Emma's artwork, covering the refrigerator, the family pictures that didn't include him. "This is beautiful, Ray. You've done so well for yourself." He sat down carefully on the edge of my couch, like he wasn't sure he was welcome. "Thank you," I said, settling into the armchair across from him rather than sitting beside him. "Can I ask what brings you here after all this time?" What followed was the story of 3 years of failure and regret. Amanda had left him within 6 months of their affair, becoming serious once it became clear that his big business dreams were just fantasies and his financial prospects were non-existent. His various attempts at starting companies had failed spectacularly, leaving him with bad credit and a reputation for unreliability in the local business community. "I've been living in my car for the past 2 months," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my apartment, my job, everything. And all I could think about was how different my life might have been if I'd stayed and fought for us instead of running away." He told me about seeing other fathers with their children at parks and restaurants, feeling a hollow ache for the daughter he'd never really known. He'd drive by our old neighborhood sometimes, hoping to catch a glimpse of us, but never working up the courage to make contact. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he continued. "I know I abandoned you when you needed me most, and I know I missed years of Emma's life that I can never get back. But I'm here now, and I want to try to make things right. I want to be the father Emma deserves and the partner you needed me to be back then." I listened to all of this with a strange sense of detachment, like he was telling me about someone else's life. The man sitting in my living room looked like Jake, sounded like Jake, but the Jake I'd loved had existed in a different lifetime. "What does making things right look like to you?" I asked. I want to come home, he said simply. I want us to be a family. I know it won't be easy, and I know I have a lot to prove, but I love you, Ray. I never stopped loving you, and I think we could have something beautiful if you give me another chance. The conversation that followed was one of the most important of my life, not because it changed anything, but because it confirmed how much I had changed. Jake, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. The woman you left behind no longer exists. I could see the confusion in his eyes. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected or prepared for. In his mind, I think he'd imagined tears or anger or at least some version of the emotional desperation he'd left behind 3 years ago. What I mean is, I'm not the same person who needed you to feel complete. Emma and I were not broken pieces waiting to be fixed. We built this life from nothing, and it's a good life. It's a life that works. I gestured around our apartment at the photos and the comfortable furniture and the evidence of our contentment. This isn't a placeholder, Jake. This isn't something we were doing while we waited for you to come back. This is our life. He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. But we were good together, Ray. Remember how good we were. Remember all the plans we made. I remember a lot of things, I replied honestly. I remember loving you completely. I also remember being the only one working to keep us afloat while you chased dreams that never materialized. I remember giving birth to our daughter alone because you'd rather be with another woman than support your family. The words weren't spoken in anger, just as statements of fact. I'd processed this pain years ago in therapy and countless conversations with Dr. Kim and Sister Margaret. I wasn't trying to hurt him, just to be honest about our history. I've changed, he insisted. I'm not that person anymore. I know what I lost, and I know what I want now. I want to be Emma's father. I want to be the man you deserved back then. This was the moment I'd wondered about for years, what I'd say if Jake ever wanted back into our lives. Now that it was actually happening, my response came naturally and without hesitation. If you want to be in Emma's life, you'll start as a stranger, earning her trust. You'll show up consistently, follow through on your promises, and prove that you're reliable. You'll go through the proper legal channels to establish visitation rights and pay child support. You'll respect the boundaries I set to protect her emotional well-being. His face showed confusion and something that might have been panic. This wasn't going according to whatever script he'd imagined. And what about us, he asked. What about our relationship? There is no us, Jake. I don't need you anymore. I want someone who chooses Emma and me every single day, not just when they have nowhere else to go. I want someone who shows up when life gets hard, not someone who runs away and comes back 3 years later, expecting forgiveness. I could see him trying to process this new version of me, the woman who spoke calmly about boundaries and expectations, instead of crying and begging him to stay. But I love you, he said, as if that fact alone should override everything else. I believe that you think you do. But love isn't a feeling, Jake. Love is a choice you make every day. It's showing up when things are difficult. It's putting your family's needs ahead of your own comfort. It's building something together instead of running away when it gets hard. He tried several more approaches over the next hour. He reminded me of good times we'd shared, made promises about the future he wanted us to have together, even offered to sign legal documents guaranteeing his commitment. But with each attempt, it became clearer that he still didn't understand the fundamental problem. You're trying to reclaim something that doesn't exist anymore, I finally told him. The Raylan you knew was someone who needed you to feel whole. The woman sitting here now doesn't need anyone. I choose to share my life with people who add value to it, not people who take from it. When he realized that manipulation and promises weren't working, Jake's demeanor shifted to anger, which was oddly reassuring because it reminded me exactly why I was right to keep him out of our life. So that's it, he demanded. I make one mistake, and you hold it against me forever. I'm Emma's father, whether you like it or not. I have rights. You have the rights you're willing to fight for legally, and the relationship with Emma that you earn through consistency and care. As for your one mistake, walking out on your newborn daughter and the woman who'd supported you for 3 years isn't a mistake, it's a character revelation. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Jake cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, and eventually a kind of defeated acceptance. When he finally stood to leave, he looked older than when he'd arrived. I don't understand how you can be so cold about this, he said at the door. I'm not cold, Jake. I'm healthy. I'm protecting the peace and stability that Emma and I have worked hard to build. If you want to be part of her life, prove that you can be a positive addition to it. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment drinking coffee that had gone cold and marveling at how the conversation had unfolded. 3 years ago, I would have been an emotional mess torn between anger and desperate hope. Instead, I felt calm and clear about the boundaries I'd established. Emma came home from her sleepover that afternoon, full of stories about movies and popcorn, and staying up too late with her friend. She was vibrant and confident, and surrounded by people who chose to love her unconditionally. Watching her, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this point. That evening, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she asked me about the man she'd glimpsed in our hallway when Sarah dropped her off. "Who was that person talking to you today, Mom?" I'd prepared for this question knowing that Jake's return might eventually require honest but age-appropriate conversation. "That was your biological father, sweetheart. He wanted to meet you, but I explained that he'd need to show he can be consistent and reliable first." Emma considered this information seriously the way she always processed new concepts. "Does that mean I might have a dad like Tyler does? Maybe if he proves that he can be a good father, but remember, we already have a wonderful family with people who love you very much. If he becomes part of our life, it would be as an addition to what we already have, not to fill something missing." She nodded and snuggled deeper into her covers. "I like our family the way it is." "Me too, baby girl. Me too." 3 months later, Jake petitioned the court for visitation rights and agreed to pay child support. Our lawyer negotiated supervised visits to start with the possibility of more if he proved reliable over time. It's been 8 months now, and he's missed 6 of his scheduled visits, usually with last-minute excuses about work or transportation. Emma's response has been matter-of-fact rather than disappointed. She enjoys the visits when they happen, but she doesn't organize her emotional life around them. She has piano lessons and soccer practice and birthday parties with friends who've been consistent parts of her world. As for me, Jake's return was actually a gift, though not in any way he intended. It confirmed that I'd truly moved beyond the person I used to be, the woman who'd needed his approval and presence to feel complete. The healing I'd done wasn't just about getting over heartbreak, it was about becoming whole on my own terms. Sometimes people leave exactly when you need them to, even if it takes years to understand why. Jake's abandonment forced me to discover strength I never knew I had, and to build a life based on my own values and choices rather than someone else's approval. The woman he left behind was someone who needed him to feel complete. The woman he found when he returned was someone who was already whole, someone who could choose love from a position of strength rather than desperation. And that I've learned makes all the difference in the world. Healing isn't about forgetting the pain or pretending the damage never happened. It's about growing beyond the person who could be destroyed by someone else's choices. It's about building something so strong and beautiful that when the storms come again, and they always do, you can weather them because you've already proven to yourself that you can survive anything. Emma and I have a beautiful life filled with people who choose us every single day. We have challenges and struggles like everyone else, but we face them from a foundation of mutual love and respect. We've learned that family isn't about biology or legal obligations. It's about the people who show up consistently and choose to love you not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. That's a lesson worth more than any relationship built on need or desperation, or the fear of being alone. Before we wrap up today's story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had someone try to come back into your life after they left during a difficult time? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because your experiences might help someone else going through something similar. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own journey toward healing and independence, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to rebuild your life stronger than before, and that sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is leave so you can discover who you really are. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you are stronger than you know and more resilient than you think. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who choose to show up for you every single day.